The day I came home from the hospital, my own
What happened
key
to my
no
lock?
longer fit my front
Hello?
door.
Is anyone there?
I stood on the porch with a suitcase in one hand
I can't do
and my
this today,
heart
Mama.
medication in the other,
Look at me
staring
when I
at
speak
the
to
lock
you.
that had guarded my home for 36 years.
You shouldn't be in here, Mom.
At first,
I'm not going
I
anywhere,
thought I was
son.
too weak from surgery to use the key correctly. Then I noticed the brass was new. Before I could knock, the door opened.
Mom.
My son, Ethan, stood there. Behind him, I saw cardboard boxes stacked in my living room. My boxes. "Mom," he said quietly, avoiding my eyes. "You can't stay here anymore." What my son didn't realize was that while he had changed every lock in my house, he had forgotten one tiny detail his father left behind. And that small mistake changed everything. If this story touches something in your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me until the end. Please like and subscribe only if these stories make you feel a little less alone. And I'd truly love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done if your own child locked you out of your home? Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Tonight, I'm sharing my story from Ohio, and perhaps you'll share yours with me too. 3 weeks before my son locked me out of my own home, I was lying in a hospital bed listening to the steady beeping of a heart monitor. The irony still makes me laugh sometimes. My heart had spent 68 years surviving disappointments, losses, and grief, only to stumble because I carried too much stress and not enough rest. The doctors called it a mild cardiac episode. They assured me I had been fortunate. A small blockage, a successful procedure, several weeks of recovery. "You're going to be just fine, Mrs. Woods," my cardiologist told me. At the time, I believed him. I had lived in the same house in Columbus, Ohio, for 36 years. My husband Richard and I bought it when Ethan was only 6 years old. We painted the walls ourselves. Richard built the back deck with his own hands. We planted the maple tree in the front yard during our first spring there. Every important memory of my life lived inside that house. Richard passed away 6 years earlier after a long battle with cancer. Losing him felt like losing half my language. For 40 years, he had been the person who understood my thoughts before I spoke them. After his death, the house became both my comfort and my burden. Friends suggested I move into a condominium. Ethan suggested assisted living. Melissa thought I should sell, but I stayed. The kitchen still smelled like Richard's coffee every morning. His old tools remained neatly organized in the garage. His favorite chair still faced the television exactly where he had left it. Sometimes grief needs walls that remember. My son Ethan was 42 years old. He worked in sales for a construction supply company. He was handsome like his father, though lately he looked tired. The lines around his eyes had deepened over the years. Melissa, his wife, was younger than Ethan by 3 years. She had always cared deeply about appearances. She dressed beautifully, drove expensive cars, and spoke often about investments, neighborhoods, and property values. We had never been especially close. Still, she was my son's wife. That was enough for me. When I was admitted to the hospital, Ethan appeared genuinely concerned. "Mom, don't worry about anything," he told me as he sat beside my bed. "Melissa and I will handle the house." Melissa nodded. "We'll bring in your mail, water the plants, Everything. At the time, their kindness brought tears to my eyes, because that is what aging does to you. You become deeply grateful for simple acts of care. During those hospital days, Ethan visited nearly every afternoon. He brought flowers one day and soup another. Melissa brought fresh pajamas. My nurses often commented, "You have such devoted children." I smiled every time. One evening, Melissa sat beside me while Ethan went to buy coffee. "You know," she said gently, "after something like this, people sometimes realize they need help." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Nothing serious. Just that you shouldn't have to live alone forever." I laughed softly. "I've managed 6 years alone." She smiled. "But things change." At the time, her words felt reasonable. Now they sound very different in my memory. The morning I was discharged, I expected Ethan to arrive by 10 o'clock. He texted me, "Running late. Give me 30 minutes." 30 minutes became an hour. Then another text. "Traffic is terrible." The nurse helping me gather my belongings frowned. "Do you have someone else who can come?" "No," I said. "My son is coming." Another 45 minutes passed. Finally, I called Ethan. No answer. Melissa answered instead. "Oh, Lola, we're tied up with something. Why don't you just take a taxi? Ethan will meet you at the house." Something in her voice felt rushed, but I ignored the feeling. The hospital arranged transportation. I sat alone in the back seat with my overnight bag resting beside me and a paper sack full of medications on my lap. As we drove through familiar streets, I felt relieved. Home, my own bed, my own kitchen, my own coffee cup. I imagined sitting on my back porch with a blanket around my shoulders. I imagined looking through Richard's photo albums. I imagined sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. The taxi stopped in front of my house shortly after noon. At first, everything looked normal. The flowers along the walkway had been watered. The lawn had been cut. The curtains were open. I paid the driver and slowly climbed the front steps. My chest still hurt slightly from surgery. My hands trembled as I searched for my keys. I inserted the key. It would not turn. I pulled it out and tried again. Nothing. For several seconds, I simply stared at the lock. The brass looked brighter. New. I blinked. Surely I was mistaken. I tried again. Still nothing. A strange coldness moved through my body. I checked the house number. The same white shutters. The same porch swing. The same flower pots. This was my home. So why didn't my key work? I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. And then I heard footsteps. My heart began to pound. The door opened only a few inches. Ethan stood there. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't surprised to see me. In fact, he looked as though he had been expecting this moment. "Mom." His voice sounded flat. I looked past him. Several cardboard boxes sat inside the living room. One of them had my handwriting on it. Christmas decorations. Another said bedroom. My stomach dropped. "Ethan," I whispered, before he could answer. Melissa appeared behind him. She crossed her arms. Neither of them invited me inside. The afternoon air suddenly felt cold despite the summer heat. I looked down at the lock once more. New brass. New keys. My son had changed the locks. While I was lying in a hospital bed and standing there on my own porch, holding my medicine in shaking hands, I realized something far worse than the pain in my chest. For the first time in my life, I no longer knew whether my own child was about to help me or take everything I had left. For several seconds, nobody moved. I stood on my own front porch, holding my hospital bag, while my son blocked the doorway. Behind him, Melissa folded her arms against her chest. Her face carried the same polite expression she used at church dinners and neighborhood gatherings. But her eyes were cold. "Ethan," I said quietly, "why can't I come inside?" He rubbed his forehead. "Mom, please, don't make this harder." Harder. The word struck me. I had just come home from the hospital. I still had surgical tape on my chest. I had spent 3 weeks worrying about whether I would survive long enough to see my garden again. And now my own son was asking me not to make things difficult. "I live here," I said. Melissa finally spoke. "Lola, we need to have an adult conversation." I looked at her. An adult conversation. As though I were the child. As though I hadn't raised Ethan alone during Richard's long business trips. As though I hadn't worked 30 years as a teacher. As though I hadn't buried my husband with my own trembling hands. "I want to sit down," I said. "I'm tired." Ethan glanced behind him. Then he stepped outside and quietly closed the door behind him. The sound nearly stopped my heart. My own son had shut my front door in my face. The afternoon sun felt unusually hot. I could hear birds in the maple tree Richard had planted decades earlier. A lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street. The world continued normally while mine was collapsing. "Mom," Ethan said softly, "you can't stay here anymore." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Melissa stepped beside him. "We've made arrangements." "Arrangements?" "For your care." I looked from one face to the other. "I don't need care. I need my bed." But Ethan avoided my eyes. "The doctors said you shouldn't live alone." "The doctor said I need rest." Melissa took a slow breath. "Your health scare made us realize this house isn't safe for you anymore." I looked past them through the small opening beside the door. I could see several boxes stacked inside. One box had my winter coats. Another contained family photographs. My stomach twisted. "You packed my things." Ethan finally looked at me. "We had to." My voice became barely audible. "You had to. Mom, please understand." "No, Ethan. You explain it to me." His shoulders slumped. "The house is too much for you." I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes pain becomes too large to fit inside a person. "I've lived here for 36 years. Melissa spoke again. "People your age often don't realize when they need help. People your age." The phrase landed like a slap. I looked at her carefully. "How old do you think I am?" "Melissa." She blinked. "That's not what I meant." "Because I may be 68, but I still know my own front door." Ethan stepped forward. "We found a wonderful place for you." My chest tightened. "What place?" "A senior living community." "No." "Mom?" "No." I shook my head. "I am not moving into a facility. It's temporary." "No." Melissa's voice hardened. "You can't stay here alone." I looked directly at my son. "When exactly did you decide this?" Neither answered. That frightened me more than anything, because decisions had apparently been made while I was lying in a hospital bed. Without me. For me. The front curtains moved slightly behind them. I realized someone had rearranged the furniture. My living room looked different. The lamp Richard bought before he died was gone. My favorite chair had disappeared. Even from the porch, I could see that my home no longer looked like mine. "Ethan," I whispered, "what have you done?" His eyes filled briefly with emotion. "We're trying to help by locking me out." Melissa reached into her purse. She pulled out several papers. "We have legal authority." I frowned. "What?" Ethan took the papers from her. He didn't hand them to me. He simply held them. "You signed documents at the hospital." My heartbeat quickened. "What documents?" "A power of attorney." "No." "You did." "No. I didn't." Melissa folded her arms. "You were medicated. You probably don't remember." The world suddenly felt unsteady. I remembered nurses, doctors, pain medication, consent forms for procedures, but I remembered no legal papers. "I never signed anything giving away my house. It's not about the house." "Then what is it about?" Neither answered immediately. That silence terrified me. A car drove slowly past our house. Mrs. Bennett, from 3 houses down, looked toward us. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask for help. Instead, I stood there like a stranger, because embarrassment often silences older women. We are taught not to make scenes, not to burden others, not to expose family problems. Ethan finally spoke. "We've already moved some things." I stared at him. "My things?" He nodded. "To where?" Melissa answered. "A storage unit." The words took my breath away. They had packed my life. While I was in a hospital bed, photographs, Richard's clothes, Christmas ornaments, my sewing supplies, our wedding album, 36 years, boxed, stored, removed. I felt suddenly weak. Perhaps Ethan noticed because he reached toward me. I stepped back. "Don't." His hand froze. A long silence settled between us. Finally, I asked the question that frightened me most. "Where am I supposed to go?" Melissa immediately answered. "We booked a suite." "A suite?" "At the Lakeside Inn." I stared at her. "A motel." They had sent me to a motel. Not a family member's home. Not Ethan's house. Not a spare bedroom. A motel. My son looked ashamed. "It's only temporary." "Until when?" He hesitated. "We'll see how things go." My eyes filled with tears. I hadn't cried during my surgery. I hadn't cried at Richard's funeral. But standing on my own porch while my son explained that I no longer belonged there nearly broke me. I looked at Ethan. When your father died, I thought losing him would be the hardest thing I would ever survive. His eyes dropped. But I was wrong. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. Lola. No. I raised my hand. For 36 years, I opened this door every day. I carried you children inside when you were sick. I stayed awake all night when Ethan had pneumonia. I sat beside Richard while he was dying. I looked directly at my son. And now you won't even let me sit down. Tears finally appeared in Ethan's eyes, but he still didn't move. He still stood between me and my home. A taxi pulled into the driveway. I hadn't called one. Melissa had. She walked toward it. The reservation is already paid. I looked at the vehicle, then at my son, then at the house Richard built, the house that knew every birthday, every Christmas, every goodbye. I suddenly noticed something else. New curtains, new flower pots. Even the welcome mat had changed. It no longer said, "The Woods family." Now it simply read, "Welcome home." And for the first time in my entire life, I realized that my own home was no longer welcoming me. As the taxi driver loaded my suitcase into the trunk, Ethan quietly said, "It's for your own good." I looked at him for a very long time. And deep inside me, beneath the pain and the heartbreak, something else began to grow. Not anger, not yet. Suspicion. Because a son who truly wants to protect his mother does not change the locks while she is in the hospital. And as the taxi drove away, I found myself asking one terrifying question. What were they so desperate to keep me from seeing the Lakeside Inn, sat beside a highway 20 minutes from my home? The sign outside flickered between two burned-out letters. The parking lot smelled of hot asphalt and gasoline. A soda machine buzzed near the office door. This was where my son had sent me. After 36 years in my own house, the young woman at the front desk smiled kindly as she handed me a room key. "First floor, Mrs. Woods?" I thanked her. My voice barely sounded like my own. The room was clean enough. A small television sat on a dresser. The curtains were faded blue. The air conditioner rattled every few minutes. I placed my suitcase beside the bed and stood in the middle of the room. For the first time since Richard died, I felt truly homeless. Not because I lacked a roof, because I no longer knew where I belonged. I sat on the edge of the mattress and opened the paper bag of medications. There were 7 different bottles. The doctor had carefully explained each one. Take this in the morning. Take this with food. Take this before bed. Suddenly, I couldn't remember which was which. My hands began shaking. I lowered my head and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears falling onto my hospital paperwork. I thought about Richard. If he had been alive, none of this would have happened. Richard had always understood people better than I did. He used to say, "Love your children, Lola, but don't give away your common sense." I never understood why he said that. Until now, that first night, Ethan called. I almost didn't answer. "Mom," His voice sounded exhausted. What? I wanted to check on you. I looked around the small motel room, the peeling wallpaper, the dim lamp, the suitcase beside the bed. I'm fine. Silence. Mom, please understand that we're trying to help. I closed my eyes. Why didn't you tell me before I came home? We thought it would upset you. It upset me anyway. Melissa's voice appeared somewhere in the background. Ethan lowered his voice. The doctor said stress isn't good for you. I almost laughed. Being locked out of my house apparently qualified as stress. When can I go home? Another silence. Finally, he said, We'll talk in a few days. No. Ethan, when can I go home? I don't know. The answer chilled me, because until that moment, I still believed this was temporary. Now I wasn't sure. The next morning, I barely slept. I woke before sunrise. For years, my mornings had followed the same routine. Coffee, the newspaper, birds outside the kitchen window, Richard's old radio. Now I sat alone drinking weak motel coffee from a paper cup. Around 10 o'clock, Ethan arrived. He carried a manila folder. Melissa remained in the car. That hurt almost as much as everything else. She wouldn't even come inside. Ethan sat in the small chair beside the window. He looked older than 42. His tie hung loosely around his neck. His eyes were tired. How are you feeling? Like someone who got evicted. He sighed. Mom. No. You answer my questions today. He looked down. I noticed he still wore the watch Richard gave him at college graduation. That nearly broke my heart. He handed me the folder. I need you to look at these. Inside were legal documents. Several pages. My name appeared multiple times. My hands became cold. What is this? A durable power of attorney. I looked up. No. You signed it. No, I didn't. He pointed to the signature. My signature. At least it looked like my signature. My name. Lola Woods. Dated 2 weeks earlier. The week after my surgery. I stared at it. A memory flickered. A nurse. Paperwork. Medication. Fatigue. But nothing like this. I don't remember signing anything. You were recovering? What exactly does this give you? Ethan swallowed. It allows me to help manage things. What things? Medical decisions. And financial matters. I looked directly at him. My house. He hesitated. Melissa suddenly entered the room. Apparently, she had been listening outside. It gives Ethan the ability to protect your assets. Protect. Another word that no longer meant what it once had. I read the document again. The print seemed blurry. My chest tightened. I don't understand. Melissa sat down. After your heart attack, we became concerned. It wasn't a heart attack. Cardiac episode. She waved her hand dismissively. The point is that you aren't well. I felt anger for the first time. I had surgery. I didn't lose my mind. Ethan rubbed his face. Mom, nobody is saying that. Then why am I sitting in a motel? Neither answered. I continued reading. The signature bothered me. The letters looked correct. But something felt wrong. For 30 years as a teacher, I had looked at handwriting. Children's handwriting changes. Adult handwriting changes. Mine had changed too. After Richard died, my hand began shaking slightly. My signature had become smaller. But this signature looked older, steadier, almost like my signature from years ago. A strange feeling crept over me. When was this signed? The hospital. What day? Ethan checked the papers. Thursday. I thought carefully. Thursday had been the day after surgery. I had barely stayed awake. I remembered nurses waking me every few hours. I remembered medication. I remembered pain. Could I have signed this? Perhaps. Perhaps not. But another detail troubled me. I always sign with my middle initial. Ethan frowned. What? My signature. I pointed. There's no M? He looked confused. For 40 years, I had signed every legal document Lola M. Woods. My middle name was Marie. Richard always teased me because I never omitted it. Our mortgage, bank accounts, insurance papers, everything. But the signature on the document simply read, Lola Woods. Melissa immediately spoke. People sign differently all the time. I looked at her. I don't... Silence. The air conditioner rattled loudly. Outside, a truck drove past. I continued studying the page. The notary section contained a name I didn't recognize. The witness signature meant nothing to me. My confusion slowly became suspicion. Not certainty. Not accusation. Just a small, uncomfortable feeling. Like a pebble inside a shoe. Ethan stood. We don't want to fight. Neither do I. The house is simply too much for you. I looked at him. My entire life is inside that house. Melissa crossed her arms. You can have your things. My things. As though my marriage were furniture. As though my memories were dishes. As though Richard's life fit inside cardboard boxes. I want to go home. You can't. Why? No answer. Again, always no answer. Ethan finally said, We've already made arrangements. What arrangements? Melissa spoke quietly. We've spoken to someone about selling. The room became silent. I felt the blood leave my face. Selling? It may be the best option. My house. For your future care. I stared at them. For several seconds. I could not speak. Sell. The word echoed inside my head. Richard's workshop. Our wedding photographs. The maple tree. The kitchen table. His ashes in the living room cabinet. Sell. I looked at my son. The little boy who once slept beside my hospital bed with a broken arm. The teenager who cried after his first heartbreak. The man whose wedding I paid for. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. I no longer understood the person sitting in front of me. After they left, I sat alone for hours. The documents remained open beside me. My eyes returned again and again to the signature, Lola Woods. No middle initial. No memory. No certainty. Only doubt. And late that evening, while the sun disappeared behind the motel parking lot, another thought entered my mind. If Ethan truly believed he was helping me, why did he seem so frightened every time I asked a simple question? The second morning at the Lakeside Inn began with rain. I sat beside the window, watching water slide down the glass while 18-wheel trucks rolled along the highway. The motel coffee tasted bitter, and my medication left a metallic taste in my mouth. For nearly 2 days, no one had visited. Ethan sent short text messages. "How are you feeling? Need anything? Rest today." Melissa sent nothing. I spent most of my time staring at the documents lying on the small table beside the bed. Every few hours, I picked them up and studied my signature again. Lola Woods. No middle initial. No memory. No certainty. Around 11 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. For a moment, I thought it might be Ethan. Instead, I found Grace Turner standing outside. Grace had lived next door to me for 28 years. She was 70 years old, widowed, and perhaps the most honest woman I had ever known. She wore old denim jackets, drove a pickup truck older than mine, and never cared what anyone thought of her. She took one look at me and immediately hugged me. "Oh, Lola." That was all she said. And suddenly I began crying again. Grace led me back inside. She placed a grocery bag on the table. "I brought soup." "You didn't have to." "I know." She sat across from me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she asked quietly, "What happened?" I looked down at my hands. "I don't know anymore." Grace took a deep breath. "Lola, I think you need to hear some things." Something in her voice frightened me. "What things?" She leaned forward. "The day after they took you to the hospital, I saw a locksmith." I frowned. "A locksmith?" She nodded. "He came to your house." My heart sank. "Ethan said the locks were changed because of safety." Grace looked directly at me. "He changed them 2 weeks ago?" I felt cold. "What?" "The locksmith was there for nearly an hour." My fingers tightened around my coffee cup. "Why didn't anyone tell me? You were in the hospital." She hesitated. "And honestly, I thought Ethan had discussed it with you." I slowly shook my head. "No," Grace continued. 2 days later, I saw a moving truck. I looked up. A moving truck. They loaded boxes. My boxes. I assume so." My breathing became shallow. She continued carefully. "And last week, I saw a real estate agent." The room became silent. "A what?" "He walked through the house with Melissa." Kevin Brooks. Although I did not know his name yet, I would later learn exactly who he was. At that moment, he was simply a stranger walking through my home. "No," I whispered. Grace nodded. I wish I was wrong. I felt dizzy. The motel room suddenly seemed very small. I remembered Melissa mentioning the possibility of selling. I remembered Ethan avoiding my questions. I remembered the papers. The signatures. The locked door. Grace reached into her purse. There's something else. She removed a small yellow envelope. The paper looked old. My name appeared on the front in Richard's handwriting. My heart stopped. Where did you get that? Grace looked nervous. Richard gave it to me. I stared at her. When? About a year before he died. I could barely breathe. He said if anything ever felt wrong, I should give it to you. The envelope trembled in my hands. Richard's handwriting. Richard's careful printing. Lola. No one had written my name exactly the way he did. Tears filled my eyes. Why didn't he give it to me? He said he hoped I'd never need to. The room became completely quiet. For several seconds, I simply looked at the envelope. Richard had always planned ahead. When he became sick, he organized every insurance paper, every bank account, every bill. He believed preparation was an act of love. I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a key, an old brass key, smaller than a house key. Attached to it was a faded tag. Basement. My hands began shaking. Grace looked confused. What is it? I unfolded Richard's note. The handwriting was slightly uneven because his illness had already begun affecting him. Lola, if you're reading this, something probably doesn't feel right. The basement entrance still works. Don't forget what we talked about. Trust yourself. Love always. Richard. I stared at the words. The basement entrance. Suddenly, I remembered. Years earlier, Richard had installed a side entrance to the basement. The old door sat behind thick shrubs along the side of the house. Very few people knew about it. The door had once connected to his workshop storage area. After he retired, he rarely used it. Ethan had been away at college when Richard installed the lock. Melissa certainly knew nothing about it. Grace frowned. What does this mean? I looked at the key. They forgot something. She leaned closer. What? There is another entrance. The rain continued outside. Cars moved slowly through the motel parking lot, and for the first time since being locked out, I felt something besides grief. Hope. Small. Fragile. But real. Grace sat quietly for several minutes. Finally, she asked, What are you thinking? I looked at Richard's note. Trust yourself. For days I had questioned my memory, my judgment, my own mind. Perhaps that had been their intention. Perhaps they wanted me to believe I was confused. Weak. Unable to understand. But Richard knew me better than anyone. If he had left this key, he must have feared something. Not necessarily Ethan, but something. A possibility. A danger. A mistake. I looked at Grace. Did Ethan seem normal? She hesitated. No. What do you mean? He looked nervous. About me. I don't know. She folded her hands. But Melissa was different. Different how? Determined. That word stayed with me. Determined. Not worried. Not compassionate. Not frightened. Determined. Grace continued. She was the one talking to the locksmith. The realtor. Melissa. The movers. Melissa. And Ethan. He mostly stood there. I thought about my son. The guilt in his eyes. The hesitation. The tears on the porch. Something wasn't fitting together. Ethan was involved. Of that, I had no doubt. But I still couldn't believe he had created all of this himself. Late that afternoon, after Grace left, I sat alone holding Richard's key. I remembered him working in the basement years earlier. I remembered him saying, "Every house needs one secret." At the time, I thought he was joking. Now I wasn't so sure. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Ethan's number. Then I lowered it. No, not yet. If they truly believed I had nowhere to go, nowhere to turn, and no way back into my own home, then perhaps they would make mistakes. Richard's note remained open beside me. Trust yourself. Outside. The rain finally stopped. The clouds began to separate, and for the first time since leaving the hospital, I realized something important. They had changed every lock they knew about, but they had forgotten one tiny detail. My husband had not, and suddenly, for the first time in days, I knew exactly where I needed to go next. I did not sleep that night. Richard's key lay on the nightstand beside my bed, catching the pale light from the motel lamp. Every few hours, I picked it up, turned it over, read the small metal tag. Basement. It seemed impossible that something so small could suddenly become important. Yet my entire life had changed because of a lock. Perhaps another lock could change it again. At 6 the following morning, I called Grace. "Are you awake?" She laughed softly. "At my age, I've been awake since 5. I need a favor." By 9 o'clock, her old pickup truck was parked outside the motel. The sky was overcast. A cool breeze moved through the trees. My chest still hurt occasionally when I moved too quickly, and Grace scolded me twice before we even left the parking lot. "You just had heart surgery." It wasn't surgery. Whatever it was, your doctor didn't recommend breaking into your own house. I smiled for the first time in days. My husband did. The drive to my neighborhood felt surreal. Every familiar street seemed different. The bakery Richard loved. The gas station where Ethan bought baseball cards as a boy. The elementary school where I taught 3rd grade. My entire life existed within those few miles. And somewhere ahead sat the house that no longer belonged to me. Grace parked 2 streets away. "Are you sure about this?" "No." "Good. That means you're thinking clearly." We walked slowly along the sidewalk. My legs felt weak. Part of me feared Ethan would appear. Part of me feared the police. Part of me feared discovering something worse than I had imagined. When my house finally came into view, I stopped. The curtains had changed. Melissa must have replaced them. Flower pots sat near the front steps. The porch swing Richard built was gone. I felt as if strangers lived there. Grace touched my arm. "You don't have to do this today." "Yes, I do." We walked around the side of the house. The bushes had grown thick over the years. Richard had intentionally planted them beside the old basement entrance. Most people never noticed the door. I pushed branches aside. And there it was. A weathered gray door. Exactly where Richard had left it. My hands trembled as I inserted the key. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the lock turned. A soft click. My breath caught. Richard had been right. The door slowly opened. A smell of dust and old wood drifted upward. Darkness. Silence. Grace looked at me. My goodness. I swallowed hard. They forgot. She shook her head. No. Richard remembered. We switched on a flashlight and slowly descended the stairs. The basement looked exactly as I remembered. Old shelves, toolboxes, Christmas decorations, Richard's workbench. The air smelled of sawdust and oil. For several moments, I simply stood there. I had not been inside this basement since Richard died. Too many memories lived there. Too much grief. Now it had become my way home. Grace spoke quietly. What do you want to do? I listened carefully. No voices. No footsteps. The house seemed empty. They must be at work. We climbed the basement stairs. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. At the top, I slowly opened the interior door, and suddenly I was standing inside my own house. I cannot fully describe that feeling. Relief, grief, anger, love. Everything at once. The kitchen looked different. Melissa had replaced my curtains. New dishes sat on the counter. My coffee maker was gone. Richard's old radio had disappeared. I walked through each room slowly. The living room furniture had been rearranged. Family photographs had vanished from the shelves. Even the cushions on the sofa had changed. It looked like someone had staged the house, prepared it, almost as if it were waiting for buyers. I entered my bedroom, or what used to be my bedroom. The bed was gone. My dresser had disappeared. Only empty walls remained. I sat down on the floor. For several minutes, I could not move. This room had witnessed 40 years of my marriage. Richard reading beside me. Christmas mornings. Late-night conversations. The night he told me he was dying. And now it looked as though I had never existed. Grace quietly stood in the doorway. I'm sorry. I wiped my eyes. So am I. As we continued searching, something caught my attention in the dining room. Several folders sat on the table. I approached carefully. Bank statements, property documents, insurance papers. My name appeared on every page. I opened one envelope. The balance in my savings account was printed clearly. My stomach tightened. Why were my financial records sitting on the dining room table? Another folder contained paperwork from my bank, several withdrawal forms. One page had notes written in Melissa's handwriting. Transfer. Consolidate. Joint account. I felt cold. Grace leaned closer. What is this? I don't know. But I was beginning to understand. Perhaps this had never been only about the house. I opened another folder. There was a list. My assets. My savings. Life insurance. Retirement account. The pages felt strangely clinical, as if someone had reduced my entire life to numbers. Suddenly, Grace raised her hand. Listen. A car door slammed outside. My heart nearly stopped. They're back. We both froze. Voices. Muffled. The front door opened. Melissa. Ethan. I recognized them immediately. My pulse raced. Grace whispered, "Basement." We moved quietly through the hallway. I heard Melissa speaking. "The realtor called again," Ethan answered. But I couldn't understand him. We slipped downstairs. The basement door closed softly. My hands were shaking. Grace looked frightened. For several minutes, we remained completely silent. Footsteps moved overhead. Cabinet doors opened. Melissa's voice. Ethan's voice. Then silence. Finally, a door closed upstairs. An engine started. The car drove away again. I released a long breath. "I can't do this again." Grace nodded. "You don't have to." But before leaving, I looked once more around the basement. Richard's workbench stood against the wall exactly as he had left it. Several old cabinets remained untouched. A small desk sat in the corner, and above it hung a sign Richard bought years ago. "Trust your instincts." I almost laughed. Richard seemed to be speaking to me from every room. As we prepared to leave, I noticed another small metal box sitting on a shelf. Dust covered it. I recognized it immediately. Richard's document box. The one he always kept locked. My pulse quickened. The key wasn't with me. Not yet. But suddenly, I realized something important. Richard had not hidden only one secret. He had hidden several. And whatever lay inside that old box might explain why he told Grace to keep the basement key. As we stepped back outside into the afternoon sunlight, I turned and looked at my house. For the first time since leaving the hospital, I no longer felt helpless. I felt afraid, but I also felt something stronger. Determination. Because my son and his wife believed they had taken everything, but they had missed one tiny detail, and that forgotten door had just led me to questions neither of them wanted me to ask. That night, I returned to the Lakeside Inn, carrying something far more valuable than the folders I had found in my dining room. I carried hope. For nearly a week, I had felt like an old woman abandoned by her own family. Every decision had been made for me. Every conversation had ended with someone telling me what I needed, what I should do, and where I should live. But the basement door had changed something. Richard had left me a path back into my own life. I sat on the motel bed with the small metal box resting beside me. The box itself was old, perhaps 20 years old, with scratches across the lid and a rusted lock attached to the front. I remembered Richard keeping important documents inside it when Ethan was still in high school. Insurance papers, military records, tax documents, things he called the boring treasures. Now it no longer looked boring. It looked important. The problem was that I didn't have the key. Grace sat beside the window. "You think Richard hid it somewhere? He hid everything somewhere." She laughed softly. "True." I remembered Richard's workshop. The shelves. The desk. The cabinets. Perhaps the key was still there. Perhaps he had expected me to find it. Or perhaps he had never imagined any of this would happen at all. That evening, Ethan called again. I let the phone ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded tired. Hello. How are you feeling? I went for a drive. Silence. Where? Around town. I deliberately said nothing else. Part of me wondered whether he would ask if I had gone home. He didn't. Instead, he said, Melissa found a senior community we'd like you to visit. My stomach tightened. I told you I don't want assisted living. It's independent living. I want my own house. Another silence. Finally, he spoke. The house is becoming complicated. Complicated? That word stayed with me. Houses are not complicated. People are. What exactly is complicated? Ethan. He hesitated. We'll talk soon. Have you hired a realtor? The silence that followed answered my question. Ethan. It's just a possibility. While I'm still alive. Mom. While I'm still alive? He sounded exhausted. We're trying to protect you. No. You're hiding something. The line became very quiet. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Melissa's voice appeared faintly in the background. Ethan. He lowered his voice. I'll call later. And he hung up. I stared at the phone. Richard had always said that people reveal themselves through the questions they refuse to answer. Lately, Ethan refused to answer almost everything. The next morning, Grace picked me up again. This time, we arrived earlier. The neighborhood remained quiet. Most people had already left for work. I used the basement key, the familiar click, the dark staircase, the smell of dust, the feeling that Richard was somehow walking beside me. We moved directly toward the workshop. Nothing appeared disturbed. Richard's tools still hung neatly along the wall. His old radio sat beside the workbench. Even his reading glasses remained exactly where he had left them 6 years earlier. My chest tightened. Grief does not disappear. It simply learns to sit quietly beside you. Grace examined the cabinets. What are we looking for? I honestly don't know. Richard had always been methodical. If he left the box, he likely left the key. I opened drawers. Nails, screws, tape measures, old receipts. Nothing. Then I remembered something. Richard had a habit. Whenever he wanted to protect something important, he placed it near something ordinary. The coffee can. Grace looked confused. What coffee can? I walked toward an old shelf. Years earlier, Richard had stored spare hardware inside empty coffee cans. There were still several sitting there. I opened the first. Bolts. The second. Washers. The third. A key. I simply stared at it. Small. Silver. Attached to a faded tag. Box. My eyes filled immediately. Grace smiled. Oh, Richard. I could almost hear my husband laughing. He had known me well enough to leave clues only I would understand. We carried the box to the workbench. My hands trembled. For a moment, I hesitated. Some part of me feared what I might find. I inserted the key. The lock opened easily. Inside lay several folders. An envelope. a flash drive, and a letter. The letter had my name written across the front. Lola. The handwriting looked stronger than the note Grace had given me. This letter had been written earlier, perhaps before Richard became seriously ill. I opened it carefully. My dearest Lola, if you're reading this, then something probably feels wrong. I don't know what life will look like after I'm gone, but I know people sometimes change when fear, money, or pressure enter their lives. I want you to trust your judgment. You are stronger than you believe. The documents inside belong to you. Keep them safe. And remember this: our home belongs to you, not because of paper, but because you built your life inside these walls. Love always. Richard. I wiped tears from my face. Grace quietly turned away. Inside the folders were documents: the original deed to the house, insurance policies, bank records, Richard's will, everything carefully organized. Then I found something unexpected: a small folder labeled camera. I frowned. Camera. Grace looked over. What camera? I opened it. Inside sat a small external hard drive. Alongside it was another note: Richard's handwriting, back workshop camera, garage camera, keep only if needed. I suddenly remembered. Years before, after several break-ins in the neighborhood, Richard had installed security cameras. Not sophisticated ones, just small recording cameras connected to a hard drive. After a year or two, we stopped discussing them. I had completely forgotten. Apparently, Richard had not. My pulse quickened. Grace. What if these still work? She understood immediately. They may have recorded something. Suddenly, everything changed. The locksmith, the movers, the realtor, Melissa, Ethan, the documents. Perhaps Richard's cameras had seen everything. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The possibility was almost overwhelming. Evidence. Truth. Answers. And yet another part of me felt tremendous sadness. Because even if the cameras revealed exactly what happened, they could never give me back the son I once knew. I thought of Ethan as a little boy helping Richard in this very workshop. I thought of Christmas mornings, baseball games, school concerts. When had we arrived here? When had my son become a stranger? As we prepared to leave, I carefully placed the documents back inside the box. The deed, the will, the letter, the hard drive. Richard had spent his final years preparing for problems I never imagined. Perhaps he feared illness. Perhaps he feared confusion. Perhaps he simply understood people better than I did. Before climbing the basement stairs, I looked once more at the workshop. The sunlight coming through the small window touched Richard's empty chair. And for the first time since his death, I felt his presence not as grief, but as protection. Outside, the afternoon sun had finally broken through the clouds. I held the hard drive tightly in my hands. Somewhere inside that small device might be the truth. And deep in my heart, I realized I was afraid to see it, because the cameras might prove that my son had betrayed me. But they might also reveal something even more painful: that he had done it willingly. The old hard drive sat on the table between Grace and me. For nearly an hour, neither of us touched it. Sometimes the truth feels heavier before you even know what it is. Grace had brought her laptop to the motel. It was nearly 10 years old and took several minutes simply to turn on. While we waited, she made coffee in the small machine beside the television. "You don't have to watch it today," she said. I stared at the black drive. Yes, I do. What if it hurts? I looked out the window. It already hurts. The truth can wound you, but uncertainty can destroy you. The computer finally started. The drive connected. Several folders appeared. Garage, workshop, backyard. Richard's handwriting again. Always organized. Always prepared. A date appeared beside the files. Some recordings were years old. Others were recent. Very recent. My heart began beating faster. The camera had still been recording. Richard had apparently connected the system to an old motion sensor before he died. The hard drive simply stored footage whenever movement occurred. Neither Ethan nor Melissa knew. At least I hoped they didn't. Grace clicked the first recent file. The garage appeared on the screen. Empty. Several minutes passed. Then Ethan entered. He looked tired. He was carrying boxes. My boxes. He placed them near the wall. Several moments later, Melissa entered. She was speaking before the audio fully connected. She doesn't need half of this. Ethan said nothing. Melissa opened a box. I immediately recognized Richard's sweaters. She held one up. Goodwill. Ethan shook his head. No. She sighed. We don't have room for all this. He sat down heavily. I don't feel good about this. Grace looked at me. I kept watching. Melissa crossed her arms. You said you wanted to help your mother. I do. Then this is helping. Ethan rubbed his face. We should wait. For what? For her to come home. Melissa laughed quietly. And then what? She says no, and nothing changes. Ethan lowered his head. The video ended. The room became silent. I realized I had been holding my breath. Keep going, I whispered. The next recording was dated 3 days later. This time, the kitchen appeared. Melissa stood at the table with several papers. Ethan paced nearby. I recognized some of the documents, the bank papers, the account information. Melissa spoke first. If we sell quickly, we can pay everything. Ethan stopped walking. I said no. We don't have another option. There has to be. There isn't. My heart tightened. Pay everything. What everything? Melissa sat down. Your cards are maxed out. Ethan remained silent. The business loan is overdue. Still silence. The mortgage is behind. I looked at Grace. Mortgage. Ethan and Melissa owned a house. Why were they behind? Melissa continued speaking. We either solve this now, or we lose everything. Ethan finally answered. Not my mother's house. Melissa looked directly at him. Then whose house the video ended? I felt dizzy. This was not what I had expected. I had imagined greed, cruelty, perhaps even hatred. Instead, I saw fear, desperation, pressure. But none of it excused what they had done. Grace quietly asked, "Did you know they had financial problems?" I shook my head. No. Ethan had never mentioned it. Not once. The next recording changed everything. The date was only 4 days before I came home from the hospital. The dining room camera. Melissa sat alone. Several papers lay before her. After a few minutes, Ethan entered. He looked exhausted. She pushed papers toward him. "I need you to sign." He sat down. "What is this, the power of attorney?" He frowned. "Mom hasn't signed it." "She will." "No." Melissa's voice became cold. "Then we're finished." He stared at her. "You can't ask me to do this. I'm asking you to save our family." He looked away. "We can talk to her. And if she says no, she won't." Melissa leaned forward. "You know she won't leave that house," Ethan said quietly. "It's her house." Those words pierced me, because somewhere inside him, my son still existed. Melissa's voice rose. "And what about our house? What about our debt? What about losing everything?" Ethan covered his face. The room remained silent. Then he said something that broke my heart. "I don't know what to do anymore." The video ended. I wiped tears from my eyes. Grace handed me a tissue. Neither of us spoke. For several minutes, I simply stared at the screen, because I finally understood something. Ethan was guilty, but he was also drowning. And drowning people sometimes pull others underwater with them. Still, there was another file. The final one. The date was the day before I returned home. I felt afraid to open it. Grace asked quietly, "Ready?" "No." But I nodded. The video showed the living room. Boxes everywhere. Melissa stood near the fireplace. Ethan sat on the couch. The room looked empty, like a house waiting to be sold. Melissa spoke. "The realtor says we can list next week." Ethan looked shocked. "Next week? Before she changes her mind? She's still in the hospital." "Exactly." My stomach turned. Ethan stood. "We're not selling while she's there." Melissa walked toward him. "Do you want collectors calling us every day?" "No." "Do you want bankruptcy?" "No." "Then stop acting like a child." He looked exhausted, broken, defeated. Then came the words I will never forget. Melissa said, "Your mother won't even know what she signed." The room became completely silent. Ethan looked at her. "What? She was medicated. Melissa, she trusts you." My hands began shaking. Grace reached for my arm. On the screen. Ethan stood perfectly still. Then he asked, "Did she actually sign everything?" Melissa did not answer immediately. She simply looked away. And in that silence, my entire world changed. Because suddenly I understood. Ethan had doubts. Ethan had fears. But Melissa knew something. Something she had never told him. Ethan spoke again. "Melissa." She finally answered. "It doesn't matter." He stared at her. It matters to me. She crossed her arms. We're too far into this now. The recording ended. The motel room was silent except for the sound of the air conditioner. Neither Grace nor I moved. My heart hurt. Not physically, emotionally, because my son may have betrayed me. But my son might also have been lied to. For the first time, I realized there were two victims sitting inside those videos. Myself, and perhaps Ethan. Grace finally spoke. What are you going to do? I looked at the black screen. I thought about Richard. I thought about the documents. The missing middle initial. The false confidence in Melissa's voice. And for the first time since being locked out, anger finally arrived. Not loud anger, not screaming anger, something colder, something steadier. Because if Melissa had truly forged my signature, then this was no longer simply family conflict. It was something much worse. I closed the laptop. Outside, evening was falling. Cars passed along the highway. The motel lights flickered on, and deep inside me, something had changed. I was no longer trying to understand why my son had betrayed me. Now I needed to discover exactly how far his wife had gone. Because one sentence continued echoing inside my head. Your mother won't even know what she signed. And suddenly, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had never signed those papers. The next morning, I finally called Samuel Carter. For nearly 30 years. Samuel had been Richard's attorney. He had written our wills, handled our property records, organized our estate plans. After Richard died, Samuel sent me Christmas cards every year, although we rarely spoke. Richard trusted him completely. And now, perhaps, I needed to do the same. His receptionist answered. Carter Law Offices. My name is Lola Woods. MS. There was a brief pause. Mrs. Woods? Of course. Mr. Carter would like to speak with you. Samuel came to the phone himself. Lola. His voice sounded older than I remembered. It's me. How are you? I nearly laughed. How was I homeless? Heartbroken. Living in a motel. Suspecting my own son. I'm afraid I need help. He became serious immediately. Come see me. Grace drove me downtown that afternoon. Samuel's office occupied the second floor of a brick building that had stood there for decades. Richard and I had visited many times. Walking through the front door felt strangely comforting. Some places remember who you used to be. Samuel Carter stood when I entered. He was 72 now. His hair had turned completely white, and he walked more slowly than he once had. But his eyes remained sharp. He took my hands. Lola. And suddenly, I almost cried, because he looked at me the way people used to look at me. Not as a problem, not as a patient, not as an elderly woman. Simply as Lola. We sat in his office. I placed the papers on his desk. The power of attorney. The financial documents. The copies Ethan had shown me. Samuel adjusted his glasses. Tell me everything. So I did. The hospital. The locks. The motel. The videos. Melissa. The house. The basement. Richard's letters. By the time I finished, nearly an hour had passed. Samuel sat quietly. He picked up the power of attorney, studied it carefully. Then he frowned. What? He looked at me. Did you sign this? No? Are you certain? I don't remember signing anything. He continued reading. Several minutes passed. Then he asked, You always sign your middle initial, don't you? I stared at him. Richard used to joke about it. A small knot loosened inside my chest. Someone else noticed. Someone else saw it. Samuel nodded. Lola Marie Woods. Yes. This signature concerns me. I felt my pulse quicken. Why? Several reasons. He pointed. First, the missing middle initial. He pointed again. The signature is unusually steady. Another point. The notary. What about it? He removed his glasses. I know this notary. My heart nearly stopped. You do? He retired 2 years ago. The room became silent. Grace looked at me. I looked at Samuel. What does that mean? It means I want to verify everything before making assumptions. He studied the document again. Where was this supposedly signed? The hospital. Was a notary present? I don't remember one. He nodded slowly. This doesn't prove fraud? But it raises questions. Questions. At least now I wasn't the only person asking them. I handed him Richard's original deed. He smiled softly. Richard never trusted banks. I almost laughed. No, he kept copies of everything. Samuel reviewed the documents. The property is entirely yours. I know. No transfer has occurred. I felt some relief. So they can't sell the house. Not yet. The words "not yet" unsettled me. What do you mean? If a power of attorney were valid, someone could potentially act on your behalf. But it isn't valid. We don't know that yet. His honesty frightened me. Law did not operate on feelings. It operated on proof, fortunately. Perhaps Richard had left some. I handed Samuel the hard drive. There are recordings. He listened carefully as I explained. Melissa, the debts, the discussions, the comments about signatures. His expression changed. Did your son know? I don't know. Does he believe you signed these papers? I think he did. Samuel folded his hands. And now. I thought about the final video, the fear in Ethan's eyes, the hesitation, the confusion. I think he isn't sure anymore. Samuel nodded. That's important. Grace spoke. Do you think Melissa forged it? Samuel remained careful. I think someone wanted Mrs. Woods removed from her home. His words felt strangely powerful. Not elderly, not confused. Mrs. Woods? The homeowner? The client? The person with rights? He leaned forward. Lola, I need to ask something difficult. I nodded. If Ethan came to you today and admitted everything, what would you want? The question surprised me. I don't know. Do you want your son arrested? No. Do you want his wife arrested? I hesitated. I want the truth. Samuel nodded. Good. He stood and walked toward his window. The law can solve documents. He turned toward me. It cannot solve families. The room became quiet. Because he was right. Even if the signature proved false, even if Melissa lied, even if the house remained mine, my son still stood on the other side of all this. And that pain had no legal remedy. Samuel returned to his desk. I recommend patience. I frowned. Patience. They believe you are weak. I disliked the word. They believe you are isolated. He continued. They believe you have nowhere to go. Grace smiled slightly. They're wrong. Samuel nodded. Exactly. He opened a file. I will verify the notary. He wrote several notes. I'll review the hospital records. Another note. And I want copies of every recording. What do I do? He looked directly at me. For now, yes. Nothing. I stared at him. They changed my locks, and they expect you to fight immediately. He folded his hands. Instead, we let them become comfortable. The strategy felt strange. I had spent my entire life solving problems quickly, but Samuel seemed calm, certain. People who believe they have won often become careless. Richard used to say something similar. Never interrupt someone making a mistake. As we prepared to leave, Samuel handed me his business card. If Ethan contacts you, listen. Listen? Yes. And Melissa? He paused. Watch her. The drive back to the motel felt different. The city looked brighter. The trees greener. The world slightly less frightening. Grace glanced toward me. You feel better? I looked out the window. I feel angry. She smiled. That's progress. That evening, Ethan called again. I answered. Mom. Hello? His voice sounded exhausted. Can we have dinner soon? My heart stopped. Why? I think we need to talk. I remembered Samuel's words. Listen. All right. When I looked through the motel window, the sun was setting. For the first time in weeks, I no longer felt powerless. Whenever you're ready to tell me the truth. The line became silent, and before Ethan finally answered, I heard something in his voice that I had not heard since all of this began. Fear. The dinner was Ethan's idea. He called the following afternoon. Mom, can we talk somewhere? I sat beside the motel window holding Samuel's business card in my hand. Where? Our house. He corrected himself immediately. Your house. The correction mattered. Perhaps only to me. Perhaps only because I had begun noticing every small detail. When? I asked. Tonight. I thought about Samuel's advice. Listen. Do not rush. Let them believe they are still in control. All right. There was a long pause. Thank you. After we hung up, Grace looked at me carefully. You're going... Yes. She frowned. Alone. I shook my head. Samuel says I should listen. What if they pressure you? They will. What if Melissa is there? She will be. Grace sighed. I don't trust that woman. Neither did I. But for the first time, I wasn't walking into the house helpless. I knew about the debt. I knew about the videos. I knew about the signature. And most importantly, I knew something Ethan did not. I had already spoken to Samuel Carter. At 6 o'clock, Ethan picked me up at the motel. He looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. For several minutes, we drove without speaking. Finally, I said, "How much debt are you in?" His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Who told you that?" "I asked you a question." He stared at the road. "A lot." "How much?" He swallowed. "More than 200,000. I felt my breath catch. "How?" "My business failed." "You never told me." I was embarrassed. He sounded ashamed. The little boy I raised hated disappointing people. Perhaps some part of him still did. "What about Melissa?" He laughed bitterly. "What about her?" "Does she know?" "Everything." The car became quiet. As we pulled into my driveway, I noticed the porch light was already on. Melissa was waiting. The sight of her standing in my doorway made my chest tighten. But this time, I did not feel powerless. This time, I simply observed. She wore an expensive sweater, perfect makeup, perfect hair, perfect smile. Too perfect. "Lola," she said warmly. The warmth felt practiced. I walked inside. The smell of my house had changed. Different candles, different flowers, different air freshener. Even my home no longer smelled like me. Melissa had prepared dinner. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Ironically, several of the recipes had once belonged to me. We sat at the dining table. My table. Richard's chair remained empty. No one sat there. For some reason, that comforted me. The meal began quietly. Small talk. The weather. My recovery. Traffic. Television. 3 people pretending nothing terrible had happened. Finally, I put down my fork. "When were you planning to tell me about the house?" Melissa answered immediately. "We wanted to protect you." I looked at her. "From what stress?" I turned toward Ethan. "From what?" He stared at his plate. "Everything." I folded my napkin. "Let's stop lying." Silence. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Melissa took a sip of water. "Lola, nobody is lying." "Then answer my questions." She crossed her arms. "What questions?" "Why was a realtor here?" Ethan looked up. Melissa remained calm. "We explored options." "Why?" "Because this house is large." "Why did you move my belongings?" No answer. I continued. "Why were my bank documents on the dining room table?" Ethan's face changed. Melissa looked at him. "What bank documents?" I watched her carefully. The surprise looked genuine. Interesting. Perhaps Ethan hadn't told her I had entered the house. Perhaps she still believed I knew nothing. "I've seen them." Ethan slowly turned toward me. "What?" "I've seen the documents." Melissa's expression hardened slightly. "How?" I ignored her question. "The savings account." Ethan looked confused. What are you talking about? Melissa interrupted. Lola, I think you're misunderstanding some things. I leaned back. No, I think I'm beginning to understand them. The room became very quiet. Ethan finally spoke. Mom, I made mistakes. The words surprised me. Melissa immediately looked at him. Ethan. No. He rubbed his forehead. I'm tired. Melissa's eyes narrowed. We discussed this. I know. He looked at me. I should have talked to you. Yes. I didn't know what to do. Yes. I was scared. His voice nearly broke. I believed that part, because fear had been living in his eyes for days. Melissa stood and carried dishes into the kitchen. The sound of plates echoed through the room. Ethan lowered his voice. Things got bad. Financially. He nodded. Very bad. Did you take money from me? No. I watched him carefully. For the first time in days, he looked directly into my eyes. No. I believed him. At least, I wanted to. He continued. I thought the power of attorney would help. Did you see me sign it? He became very still. The question sat between us. Melissa returned. She answered before he could. Of course she signed it. I looked directly at her. Did you watch me? Her expression remained calm. Yes. When? The hospital. What room? She hesitated. My pulse quickened. Ethan looked at her. What room? Melissa turned toward him. What difference does it make? It matters. She became irritated. You said you trusted me. He stared at her. I asked you if she signed it. Melissa looked away, and suddenly I saw something I had not seen before. Fear. Not mine. Hers. I remembered Samuel. Watch her. I reached into my purse. Inside sat a small recorder Samuel had given me that morning. He had called it insurance. I had turned it on before entering the house. Every word, every silence, every contradiction, recorded. Melissa stood abruptly. This isn't helping anyone. I remained calm. Then help me understand. She folded her arms. The truth is simple. No. I looked directly at her. The truth is usually complicated. Ethan looked exhausted. He stood and walked toward the living room. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then he said quietly, Did Mom actually sign it? Melissa froze. I could see her thinking. Calculating. Choosing. Finally, she answered. She intended to. Ethan turned. What does that mean? She looked angry now. It means she trusted us. No. His voice became stronger. Did she sign it? Melissa looked at me, then at Ethan, and for the first time since all this began, I realized something. She had expected him to stop asking questions. She had expected me to stay afraid. She had expected both of us to remain weak. But something had changed. Ethan looked at her again. Melissa. She said nothing, and that silence told me more than any confession could. I stood slowly. My chest still hurt occasionally, but my voice remained steady. I think dinner is over. Ethan looked frightened. Mom, no. I picked up my purse. We'll talk again. Melissa spoke sharply. When? I looked directly at her. Soon, very soon. Because, for the first time, Ethan had begun doubting her, and doubt is dangerous, especially when it finally enters a marriage built on secrets. As Ethan drove me back to the motel, neither of us spoke. When we arrived, he turned toward me. Mom. Yes. His eyes were filled with something I had not seen in weeks. Regret. And perhaps fear. If I tell you everything? He couldn't finish. I looked at my son. The little boy still existed somewhere inside the man who had changed my locks. And quietly, I answered, Then tell me before someone else does. The next morning, Samuel Carter called before 8. His voice was calm. Too calm. Lola, I need you to come to my office. Something inside me tightened. What happened? I verified the notary. I sat upright in the motel bed. And he retired 2 years ago. The room suddenly felt cold. Are you certain? Completely? I closed my eyes. The signature, the missing middle initial, the videos, Melissa's hesitation. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Grace drove me downtown again. The entire trip passed in silence. For days, I had suspected something was wrong. Now I was beginning to understand exactly how wrong. Samuel was waiting when we arrived. Several papers sat neatly arranged on his desk. Beside them sat a business card. I recognized the name immediately. Kevin Brooks, the realtor. Samuel adjusted his glasses. I spoke with Mr. Brooks yesterday. My heartbeat quickened. What did he say? He believed you were fully aware of the sale. I felt sick. He met Melissa several times. And Ethan, only once. That answer mattered. Samuel continued. When Mr. Brooks learned you had just returned from the hospital, he became uncomfortable. Grace frowned. Why didn't he stop everything? He did. Samuel slid a document across the desk. He refused to list the property until additional paperwork was completed. I stared at the paper. What paperwork? Proof that the power of attorney was legitimate. A small feeling of relief entered my chest. At least one stranger had been more careful than my own family. Samuel folded his hands. There is another issue. I looked up. The title office requested additional signatures. Mine. Yes. The room became silent. I understood immediately. The house had not been sold because they still needed me. Melissa had simply assumed she could eventually pressure me or deceive me. Samuel continued. I think they're going to try again. Grace looked surprised. You mean ask Lola to sign? Samuel nodded. And when they do, We need to be ready. I frowned. What do you mean? He leaned forward. I believe Melissa still thinks you know very little. She does. Good. The word startled me. Good. Yes. He opened another file. The strongest evidence isn't the signature. What is? The conversation. I immediately understood. The recorder. The dinner. Melissa's answers. Her hesitation. Samuel had listened to everything. He looked directly at me. I believe Melissa is beginning to panic. For the first time in weeks, I felt something resembling control. What happens now? He smiled slightly. We wait. At noon, my phone rang. Melissa. I looked at Grace. She nodded. I answered. Lola. Her voice sounded unusually pleasant. Yes. I've been thinking. That alone frightened me. What about... I don't want us fighting. Neither did I. But only one of us had changed locks. She continued. I think we should finish the paperwork. My heart slowed. What paperwork? The housing documents. I glanced toward Samuel. His expression did not change. What documents? The ones regarding the property. Samuel quietly picked up a pen and began writing. Ask where. When? There was a brief pause. Tomorrow? Where? A notary office. My pulse quickened. Samuel wrote another note. Agree. I took a breath. All right. The silence on the other end surprised me. Apparently, she had expected resistance. Wonderful. What exactly am I signing? We'll explain everything there. After we hung up, Grace spoke first. She's really doing it. Samuel nodded. Yes. He stood and walked toward his filing cabinet. I know the office she mentioned. You do. The notary works with my office occasionally. My heart pounded. What does that mean? It means tomorrow you won't go alone. The following afternoon, Ethan picked me up. He seemed nervous. His hands trembled slightly against the steering wheel. Melissa says this will fix everything. I looked at him. Do you believe her? He stared ahead. I don't know. That answer broke my heart, because my son no longer trusted his own wife. The office sat inside a small professional building. Melissa waited in the lobby. She smiled too quickly. Everything about her seemed overly controlled. The receptionist greeted us. The notary prepared papers. And suddenly, I realized what Samuel had meant, because sitting quietly in a nearby office was Samuel Carter himself. Melissa had not seen him. Neither had Ethan. Samuel had arranged everything. The notary handed papers toward me. I looked at the title. Property Transfer Authorization. My blood turned cold. This isn't what you described. Melissa immediately spoke. Lola, this is only a formality. I looked at Ethan. His face had become pale. What is this? Melissa's smile weakened. It's part of the process. What process? The house. He stared at her. The sale. She hesitated. Eventually. You told me we weren't selling yet. The room became quiet. I placed the papers on the table. No. Melissa looked frustrated. Lola. No. The office door opened. Samuel Carter stepped inside. Everything changed. Melissa froze. The notary looked surprised. Ethan stood. Mr. Carter. Samuel calmly approached the table. Good afternoon. Melissa's face had lost all color. What are you doing here? He placed several documents beside the transfer papers. Representing my client. He looked at me. Mrs. Woods? Not Lola. Mrs. Woods. Melissa tried to recover. There's been a misunderstanding. Samuel nodded. Yes? He lifted the power of attorney. This document contains a retired notary. Silence. He placed another paper down. The signature differs significantly from decades of Mrs. Woods' legal records. Melissa said nothing. He continued. The hospital has no record of outside legal witnessing. Ethan looked at his wife. What? She finally spoke. I can explain. Samuel calmly interrupted. And before any explanation, I believe the title office should hear the entire conversation recorded during last week's dinner. The room became completely silent. Melissa stared at me. I looked back at her. For the first time, I saw fear. Real fear. Ethan turned toward her. You recorded us. I answered quietly. Yes. He looked at Melissa. Did she sign it? No one moved. No one breathed. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. But they were not tears of regret. They were tears of defeat. Finally, she whispered, I was trying to save us. Ethan stepped backward. No. She looked at him desperately. We were losing everything. Did she sign it? Her voice broke. No. The room disappeared around me. For several seconds, I heard nothing. After weeks of uncertainty, weeks of doubt, weeks of wondering whether I had forgotten, the answer had finally arrived. I had never signed anything. My son slowly sat down. His face looked empty. His voice barely existed. You lied to me, Melissa cried. I did it for us. He looked at her. No. Then he looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I had not seen since he was a child. Complete heartbreak. Because in that moment, Ethan realized two terrible things. His wife had lied, and he had helped destroy his own mother because he believed her. Samuel quietly gathered his papers. The notary said nothing. No one moved. Outside, rain had begun falling against the windows. And for the first time since returning from the hospital, I finally understood something. The locks had never been the real betrayal. The real betrayal had been trust. And now that trust lay shattered on a conference table between a mother, a son, and the woman who had nearly stolen both their lives, after the meeting at the title office, nobody called me for 2 days. The silence felt strange. For weeks, Ethan and Melissa had controlled every conversation. They had made plans, moved boxes, signed papers, and discussed my future without me. Now they were quiet, and silence can sometimes be louder than arguments. I remained at the motel. Grace visited every morning. Samuel called each afternoon. The legal situation had changed quickly. The power of attorney was being challenged. The title office had frozen all activity involving my property. The realtor had withdrawn, and Melissa had suddenly stopped answering calls. But the person I thought about constantly was Ethan, because the image of his face inside that office would not leave me. Shock, betrayal, pain. He had hurt me deeply, yet for the first time, I realized that he had also been living inside a lie. On the third evening, my phone rang. Ethan. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Hello? His voice sounded weak. Mom, can I see you? I looked out the motel window. The parking lot lights had just turned on. When? Now. I hesitated. For weeks, I had imagined what I would say if my son finally came to me. Anger, disappointment, questions. But none of those feelings seemed clear anymore. All right. He arrived 20 minutes later, alone. No Melissa. No explanations. Just my son. He looked terrible. His eyes were red. His clothes were wrinkled. He sat in the chair beside the window and lowered his head. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I left the house. My heart tightened. What? I moved out. I stared at him. Where is Melissa? At home. He laughed bitterly. I guess it's your home. I said nothing. He rubbed his face. I didn't know. I believed him. Not completely, but enough. I know you didn't know everything. He looked at me. But I knew enough. The honesty surprised me. He continued. I knew we were in trouble. Why didn't you tell me? He looked ashamed. Because I was embarrassed. $200,000. He nodded. Almost 240? My breath caught. What happened? He stared at the carpet. My business partner stole money. I listened. The company failed. Another pause. We refinanced the house. Melissa knew. Everything. He swallowed. Then the credit cards. Another silence. The loans. His voice broke. I couldn't fix it. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who once came home after failing a math test. Not because he feared punishment, because he hated disappointing me. I should have come to you. Yes. I know. He wiped his eyes, then, I thought I could fix everything. And Melissa, he looked away. She said your house could save us. The words hurt. Not because they surprised me, because they confirmed what I already knew. My home had become a solution, an asset, a number, not the place where his father lived, not the place where he grew up. A solution. He continued quietly. At first, she said we'd ask you. And then, she said your health changed things. I listened carefully. She said you needed care. I said nothing. She said you'd agree eventually. He looked at me. When you came home, I thought we'd talk. I remembered the locked door, The boxes. The motel. You didn't know? Why? He closed his eyes. Because I was ashamed. The room became quiet. Outside, a truck drove through the parking lot. The air conditioner rattled. Life continued, even when families fall apart. He looked up. Did she really forge it? I took a deep breath. I don't know everything yet. But she lied. Yes. He nodded slowly. I asked her after the meeting. What did she say? He laughed sadly. That she did it for us. I remembered Melissa saying exactly the same thing. For us. As though those words erased everything. Ethan continued. She said we were desperate. And were you? Yes. He looked around the motel room. But not this desperate. For several seconds, we simply sat there. Then he asked the question I had feared. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at my son. The answer should have been easy. No. You changed the locks. You packed my life into boxes. You sent me to a motel. You stood between me and my own home. But motherhood is rarely easy. I remembered his first steps. His first broken bone. His first heartbreak. I remembered Richard holding him in the hospital after appendicitis. I remembered Christmas mornings, baseball games, graduation. 42 years of loving one person. Those years do not disappear because of one terrible mistake. I don't know. His eyes filled. I deserve that. I nodded. Yes. Another silence. Then he reached into his pocket. He placed something on the table. My house key. The original. The one he had taken. I shouldn't have done it. I stared at the key. For several moments, neither of us touched it. Finally, he said, I changed the locks myself. Why? Because Melissa said you would fight. I almost smiled. She was right. For the first time, he smiled too. A small, sad smile. Then his expression changed. There's something else. My stomach tightened. What? He took a deep breath. The mortgage. What about it? He looked directly at me. Melissa used your name. The room became very quiet. What do you mean? When we refinanced our house, she told the bank that you planned to help us. I felt cold. Did I sign anything? No. Then how? He lowered his eyes. I don't know. A terrible feeling entered my chest. Because suddenly, this situation felt larger, more serious. Not simply one forged signature, possibly several. The recorder Samuel had given me sat inside my purse. I quietly turned it on. Not because I distrusted Ethan, because the truth mattered. He continued. I found papers. What papers? Applications. My pulse quickened. Where? At our house. He looked ashamed. Your house. I leaned forward. What applications? I don't know. He swallowed. But your name was on them. The room became silent again. For the first time since the title office meeting, I realized this story might not be finished. Not yet. Melissa had lied once. Perhaps more than once. And if Ethan was telling the truth, there could be documents I had never seen. Before leaving, he stood near the door. He looked older than 42. Much older. "I'm staying with a friend." I nodded. "All right." "Mom?" "Yes." His voice shook. "I'm sorry." Real apologies are different. They do not ask for forgiveness. They simply tell the truth. And for the first time in weeks, my son was finally telling the truth. After he left, I sat alone holding the original house key, the one that no longer opened my front door, the one that once belonged to my home. And suddenly, I realized something. The locks had been changed twice. Once on my front door, and once inside at my son. But perhaps both of them could still be opened. 3 days after Ethan left Melissa, I returned home. Not permanently. Not yet. Samuel wanted to complete several legal steps first. The locks would need to be changed again. The power of attorney had been formally challenged. The bank accounts were being reviewed, but he believed it was time. "It is still your house. Lola." Those words mattered. For weeks, I had lived inside uncertainty. Now I needed to stand inside my own front door again. Grace drove me. Ethan asked if he could come. I said no, not because I hated him, because some journeys must be taken alone. The afternoon sun fell across the neighborhood exactly as it had thousands of times before. Children rode bicycles. Dogs barked. A lawn sprinkler turned slowly beside the Hendersons' house. The world had moved forward while mine had stopped. The new locksmith arrived shortly after we did. His name was Frank. So, he was kind enough not to ask questions. Samuel had arranged everything. As Frank removed the locks Ethan had installed, I stood quietly on the porch. Metal against metal. Screws falling into a small tray. A simple process. And yet it felt enormous. Grace stood beside me. "How do you feel?" I looked at the front door. I don't know, because the truth was complicated. Part of me felt victorious. Part of me felt exhausted. Part of me wanted to cry. And part of me still remembered Ethan standing in this exact doorway, telling me I could not come inside. Frank handed me a new key. "This one belongs to you." The weight of it in my hand nearly brought me to tears. Not because it opened a lock, because it represented something much larger. My life, my choices, my home. I stepped inside. The silence greeted me first. Melissa had left. Samuel had arranged for her attorney to retrieve several personal items the previous evening. She had moved into an apartment across town. The house felt strangely empty. Too quiet. Too clean. Too unfamiliar. Grace walked beside me. The living room remained rearranged. The curtains still belonged to Melissa. The flowers on the table were artificial. Richard's chair sat in the corner exactly where it had always been. But everything around it felt wrong. I slowly walked into the kitchen. The air freshener remained. Different dishes sat inside the cabinets. My coffee mugs were still packed away somewhere. 36 years of memories had been interrupted. I opened one cabinet. Nothing familiar. Another. Nothing. I suddenly understood something. Taking a home is not always about ownership. Sometimes it is about erasing a person, and Melissa had nearly erased me. Grace touched my shoulder. You don't have to do everything today. She was right, because everywhere I looked, I found evidence of absence. My photographs, my decorations, my routines. Gone. The moving company had placed my boxed belongings inside the garage. Dozens of boxes. Christmas, bedroom, kitchen, photos, books. One box read, Mom's Things. I stared at those words, Mom's Things, as if 40 years of marriage and motherhood could fit inside cardboard. Grace helped me carry several boxes into the living room. We opened the first, family photographs. Richard holding Ethan as a baby. Our wedding, Christmas mornings, graduation pictures. I sat on the floor and began crying. Not because I was sad, because I had found myself again. Hours passed. We unpacked dishes, photographs, blankets, Richard's books, my sewing basket. Every item felt like a small rescue. Late that afternoon, Samuel arrived. He carried several documents. The bank investigation has begun. I looked up. And there are irregularities. My stomach tightened. How serious? We don't know yet. He sat down. Ethan told us about the applications. Did you find them? He nodded. Yes. My pulse quickened. Was my signature used? No. I exhaled. But your financial information was. I felt cold. Samuel continued carefully. It appears Melissa collected documents over time. Tax returns, account statements, insurance information, everything. Perhaps while visiting, perhaps while helping, perhaps while pretending to care. I felt sick, because trust is often stolen slowly, one paper at a time, one favor at a time, one visit at a time. Grace asked, Will there be charges? Samuel hesitated. Possibly. The room became quiet. For weeks, I had wanted justice. Now, I wasn't certain what justice meant. Melissa had done terrible things. But she had also destroyed her own marriage, her own future, her own life. Samuel looked directly at me. You do not have to decide today. I nodded, because I truly did not know. That evening, after everyone left, I remained alone in the house for the first time. I sat in Richard's chair. The sun slowly disappeared through the living room window. The silence felt different now. Not lonely, peaceful. My eyes moved toward the front door, the new lock, the new key, and suddenly I realized something. I had changed the locks too. The difference was simple. Ethan changed them to keep me out. I changed them to protect myself. Around 8 o'clock, there was a knock. I froze. Another knock. I walked slowly to the door. Ethan stood outside. He carried a toolbox. I said nothing. He looked nervous. I know you told me not to come. Yes. I won't stay. I waited. He held up the toolbox. Dad's tools. My eyes filled immediately. I found them in my garage. Apparently, he had taken them during the move. He lowered his eyes. I thought maybe you'd want them back. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I opened the screen door. He handed me the box. Inside sat Richard's hammer, his measuring tape, his glasses, his favorite screwdriver. Small things, important things, pieces of a man. I'm sorry. His voice broke. Again, and this time I believed him. Not because of his words, because he expected nothing. No forgiveness, no invitation, no second chance. Only the opportunity to return what belonged to his father. I looked at my son, the man who had changed my locks, the boy I had raised, the stranger, the child, all of them standing together. I can't forgive you yet. He nodded. I know. But I don't hate you. Tears filled his eyes. I don't deserve that. No. I took a breath. But your father loved you. He began crying. Real tears. Not for himself. For Richard. For me. For the man he had become. As he turned to leave, I spoke. Ethan. He stopped. Get help. He nodded. I will. And no more lies. No more lies. He walked away. I stood at the doorway watching him disappear into the darkness. For weeks, I believed I had lost everything. My home, my son, my future. But standing there with Richard's toolbox in my hands, I realized something important. Sometimes healing does not begin with forgiveness. Sometimes it begins with boundaries. And for the first time in many years, I finally understood the difference. Autumn arrived quietly that year. The maple tree Richard and I planted nearly 36 years earlier had begun turning gold. Leaves covered the front yard, and every morning I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a cup of coffee warming my hands. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. Not every night, but enough. Healing, I discovered, does not happen all at once, see. It arrives in small moments. The first morning you wake up without fear. The first meal that tastes normal. The first laugh that doesn't feel guilty. The first time your house feels like home again. Grace visited nearly every day. Samuel stopped by once a week. The bank investigation continued, though very slowly. Melissa had hired an attorney. Samuel believed several financial issues would eventually be settled privately. Lawsuits don't heal families, he told me one afternoon. He was right, because while legal papers could return my home, they could not repair my son or my heart. I spent most of October unpacking. Every box felt like reopening part of my life. Christmas ornaments, Richard's old records, photographs, letters, the blue quilt my mother made before she died. Each object reminded me that I had existed long before this betrayal. One afternoon, while sorting through my sewing supplies, I entered the small room beside the kitchen. My sewing room. Melissa had used it for storage. Boxes, old decorations, unused furniture. I stood quietly in the center of the room. For years, I had sewn blankets for church charities, baby quilts for neighbors, small gifts for friends. Richard used to sit in the doorway reading while I worked. Suddenly, I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted the room back. Not simply the furniture, the purpose. Over the next several weeks, Grace helped me repaint the walls. We opened the curtains. We moved out the boxes. We brought in my sewing table, my fabrics, my baskets, my machine. For the first time since Richard died, I created something new. A quilt. Small, simple, blue and white. When I finished it, Grace smiled. "You should teach again." I laughed. "I'm 68. So, that question stayed with me. So age had become the excuse everyone used. Too old to live alone. Too old to decide. Too old to understand. Too old to remain independent. Perhaps I had started believing it myself. A month later, Grace and I invited several women from church for coffee. Widows, retired teachers, grandmothers, women living alone, women who had spent years caring for everyone except themselves. We sat around my dining room table. We sewed, talked, laughed, shared stories. One woman confessed that her children wanted her to sell her house. Another admitted she was afraid of being alone. Someone cried. Someone laughed. And suddenly, my home became alive again. Not with fear, with purpose. The following week, Ethan appeared. He carried a rake. I looked at him from the porch. "What are you doing?" "The leaves." I crossed my arms. "I didn't ask." "I know." He looked embarrassed. "I just thought I'd help." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I handed him the rake from the garage. He spent nearly 2 hours in the yard. We barely talked. Sometimes healing begins in silence. Before leaving, he stood beside the porch. "How's your heart?" "Better." He nodded. "Mine too." I almost smiled. Over the next several weeks, he returned. Sometimes he fixed things. Sometimes he mowed. Sometimes he carried groceries. He never entered the house unless I invited him. He never mentioned money. He never mentioned Melissa. He simply appeared, worked, left, and slowly, something changed. Not trust, not yet, but possibility. One afternoon, while repairing the fence Richard built years earlier, Ethan suddenly said, "Dad would be angry." I stood beside him. "Yes." He lowered his eyes. "I think about him every day." "So do I." He tightened a bolt. "I failed him." I watched my son, 42 years old, gray beginning at his temples, lines around his eyes, a man carrying enormous regret. "He loved you." "I know." "He would be disappointed." Ethan nodded. "I know." "But he would still love you." His eyes filled. For several moments, he could not speak. Eventually, He whispered, "I don't understand how I became that person." I understood. Fear, debt, shame, desperation. Those things change people, not always forever, but enough. As Thanksgiving approached, Grace suggested we host dinner. I immediately refused. "No. Why? Too soon?" She nodded. Perhaps she was right. Some wounds require time. The day before Thanksgiving, Ethan brought groceries: a turkey, vegetables, pie. I looked at him. "What's this?" He smiled slightly. "You always cooked." I felt tears in my eyes. "I don't know if we're ready." "Maybe not." He looked at the bags. "But I thought maybe you might want the choice." Choice. That was the word. For months, everyone had taken my choices away. Now my son was giving one back. I invited him inside, only for coffee. Nothing more. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Richard drank coffee every morning, the same table where Melissa once discussed selling my house. Now only Ethan and I sat there. Quiet, careful, human. "I started counseling," he said. I looked surprised. "The financial counselor." He shook his head. "A therapist." That surprised me even more. He smiled sadly. "Turns out, destroying your relationship with your mother isn't emotionally healthy." I laughed. The first genuine laugh we had shared in months. Outside, leaves fell from the maple tree. Inside, something softened. Not completely. Not enough, but enough to continue. When Ethan left, he paused at the front door. "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me come back." I thought carefully before answering. "You haven't come back yet." He looked confused. I continued. "You're still finding your way." He nodded. "I think you're right." After he left, I sat alone in Richard's chair. The house felt warm. The sewing room lights glowed softly. My coffee cup rested beside me, and for the first time in a very long time, I no longer thought about the locks. I thought about doors, because some doors should remain closed. Some should open slowly, and some require both people to stand patiently on opposite sides until they are ready. I still didn't know whether I could fully forgive my son, but I knew something else. I was no longer afraid of the answer. Thanksgiving arrived on a cold Thursday morning. The maple tree outside my window had lost nearly all of its leaves. The air carried the sharp smell of approaching winter, and the first frost covered the grass when I stepped onto the porch. For several minutes, I stood there with my coffee. 1 year earlier, Richard had stood beside me. 2 years earlier, Ethan had carved the turkey in my kitchen. 3 years earlier, Melissa had brought pumpkin pies. Life changes quietly until one day you realize an entire world has disappeared. I had expected to spend Thanksgiving alone. Honestly, part of me wanted to. Peace had returned to my home. My sewing group now met every Tuesday. Grace practically lived next door again. The house finally smelled like coffee, cinnamon, and old books instead of unfamiliar candles. I had survived. Perhaps that was enough. At 9 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Ethan. "Mom." "Good morning." His voice sounded nervous. "I wanted to ask something." I sat down at the kitchen table. "All right. If the answer is no, I understand." I waited. "Could I come by today?" I looked toward Richard's empty chair. Months earlier, I would have said no immediately. Now I wasn't certain. "Just you. Just me." I remained quiet. "No pressure." I took a breath. "Come at noon." The relief in his voice was immediate. "Thank you." After we hung up, I walked through the house, the dining room, the kitchen, the living room, the rooms that had nearly been taken from me, the rooms that had once felt empty, the rooms that now belonged to me again. I stopped in front of Richard's photograph. His smile remained exactly as I remembered. "I don't know what I'm doing," I told him. Of course. He didn't answer, but somehow I heard him anyway. Love him. Hold him accountable. Do both. At noon, Ethan arrived. He carried nothing. No flowers. No gifts. No attempts to impress me. Only himself. That seemed important. He looked healthier than he had weeks earlier. He had lost weight. His eyes looked clearer. He stood awkwardly near the doorway. "Happy Thanksgiving." I smiled slightly. "Come in." The house felt different with him inside. Not painful, not comfortable either. Simply different. He walked slowly through the living room. "The photos are back." "Yes." He looked at Richard's picture. "Dad would like the sewing room." I smiled. He would. For nearly an hour, we cooked together. Small conversations. Simple things. Potatoes. Stuffing. Turkey. At one point, Ethan stopped beside the sink. "I sold my truck." I looked at him. "Why?" "Debt." He nodded. "I started paying things off." I remained quiet. "The counseling helps." "I'm glad." He took a deep breath. "I filed for divorce." The words hung in the air. I had expected them. Still, hearing them made me sad. Not for Melissa. For him. Because every divorce is also the death of a future someone once believed in. "How are you?" He thought for a moment, embarrassed. I nodded. "Good." He looked surprised. "Good." Embarrassment means you understand what happened. He looked down. "I think about that day constantly." "The locks?" He nodded. "I hear your voice." So did I. But now it sounded different. Less anger. More sadness. He continued. "I became someone I don't recognize." I placed a dish on the counter. "No." He looked confused. "You became someone frightened." He remained silent. "Fear doesn't excuse it." "I know. But fear explains some of it." His eyes filled. I thought I was losing everything. You nearly did. He nodded. Yes. At 3 o'clock, there was another knock. Grace. Of course. She carried pie. I refuse to let either of you ruin Thanksgiving. For the first time in months, the house filled with laughter. Small laughter. Careful laughter. But real. We ate slowly. Talked. Remembered Richard. Shared stories. At one point, Grace looked directly at Ethan. Your father once fell off my roof.